You are at a social event when a friend introduces you to someone new. The person says their name clearly while shaking your hand, and you smile back. Within seconds, the conversation shifts to a shared interest, and the moment passes. Later, you see that same face across the room, recognizable in every detail. But when you reach for the name to greet them properly, your mind offers only a blank space. You might immediately think you are simply bad at remembering names. Yet the face you can recall is far more complex than a single word. This gap tells us something crucial. The problem is not a general memory failure. Something different happens to a name in those first few seconds compared to a face. To see it clearly, we need to examine how the brain treats new information at the moment of introduction. Face processing is one of the most highly developed skills we possess. Even newborns show a preference for looking at face-like patterns over other shapes. As we grow, we become experts at recognizing thousands of faces, often after a brief glance. That ability relies on perceiving a face as a whole configuration, not a collection of separate parts. The eyes, the spacing, the unique proportions are all captured instantly and stored in a rich visual memory network. A name, however, arrives as a string of sounds with no built-in picture. Unless you already know someone with that name, it has no automatic meaning attached to it. Your mind must do something active with that sound for it to become a memory, and that is where the trouble begins. In cognitive psychology, the first step toward remembering is called encoding. Encoding is the process of transforming what you perceive into a mental representation that can be stored. If a piece of information is not deeply encoded, it may never make it into long-term memory at all. And a name, spoken once in a noisy room while you are also processing a new face, rarely receives deep encoding. There is a classic finding in memory research known as the Baker-Baker paradox. Imagine a researcher shows you a photograph of a woman and says her last name is Baker. Later, you are asked to recall the name, and you struggle to retrieve it. Now imagine a different group of participants is shown the same photo and told the woman is a baker by profession. Remarkably, those people remember that fact far more often than others remember the name Baker. The word is identical in sound, yet the meaning makes all the difference. When you hear baker as a job, your mind instantly activates related ideas: bread, a warm kitchen, an early morning routine. That web of associations creates multiple pathways back to the word, which strengthens the memory trace. A last name, even if it is the same word, usually arrives as an arbitrary label with no semantic network attached. Without those connections, the name remains isolated and fragile, easily overwritten by the next piece of incoming conversation. This insight changes the question we should ask about the moment you forgot the name at the gathering. It is not that you heard the name and it slipped out of a memory drawer. It is that the drawer was never fully constructed. But there is another layer to the problem, one rooted in what else your mind is doing during an introduction. Social encounters place a high demand on your working memory, the mental workspace that holds and manipulates information temporarily. While the person is speaking, you are simultaneously managing your own self-presentation, perhaps planning what to say next. That shift reduces the cognitive resources available for encoding what the other person is saying, including their name. So even though you nodded and looked attentive, your mental spotlight may have already moved away from the name by the time you could repeat it. Add background noise, the novelty of the face, and a slight nervousness, and the name receives only a fraction of the processing it needs. The result is a strong memory for the face and a vanishingly weak memory for the name. Names themselves also have properties that make them especially hard to encode. Many common first names sound similar, and they belong to a large set of possible words without a fixed meaning. Unlike a story or a fact, a name lacks internal structure that helps you reconstruct it later. If you forget a detail of an event, logic can sometimes fill the gap. If you forget a name, there are no clues within the word itself. That is why you might recognize a name when someone else says it, even if you cannot produce it on your own. Recognition is easier than recall because recognition provides the original information again, triggering a sense of familiarity. But in a social moment, you often need to recall the name from scratch, a much harder task. Now consider the emotional weight of forgetting a name. It can feel embarrassing, as though you were not paying enough attention or do not care enough about the person. That embarrassment can then create anxiety, which in future introductions consumes even more mental capacity. The belief that you are terrible with names becomes a self-fulfilling story. When you tell yourself you will forget, you stop trying to encode deliberately, and the prediction comes true. But the science offers a different perspective, one that releases you from the idea of a flawed memory. Forgetting a name in the first encounter is not evidence of a broken ability. It is evidence of the normal way the mind prioritizes information. Without a deliberate encoding strategy, the mind tends to save the rich sensory and social information, like a face and a feeling, while discarding an arbitrary label. That tendency may have been useful throughout evolution, when remembering who someone's was depended more on their appearance and actions than on a verbal tag. Today, of course, names carry immense social significance, and failing to recall one can strain a new connection. So the challenge becomes how to align the mind's natural processes with the social demand of name learning. Here is where the research on memory improvement provides not a magic trick, but a set of practical strategies rooted in how encoding works. The most effective approach is to take the arbitrary sound of a name and weave it into a meaningful network as quickly as possible. One method is to repeat the name back immediately upon hearing it. Saying the name aloud forces you to direct attention to it and engages your motor and auditory systems, strengthening the initial trace. Another technique is to ask a question about the name, such as its origin or spelling. When you learn that a name means bright or is a family heirloom, you create the kind of semantic richness that the baker in the experiment enjoyed automatically. You can also link the name to a visual feature of the person's face, creating a vivid, even unusual, mental image. For example, if you meet a tall person named Sam who mentions sailing, you might imagine a sailboat balanced on Sam's shoulders. The image does not need to be logical. Its very oddness makes it memorable, because the mind tends to remember distinctive and elaborate information. Such strategies all rely on the principle of elaboration, processing information deeply by connecting it to what you already know. Elaboration is the opposite of mere repetition, which only maintains information in short-term memory briefly without building lasting access. Importantly, these techniques do not require a superior memory capacity. They require a shift in what you do the moment you hear a name. Think back to the gathering where the name vanished. In that original scene, you heard a sound, nodded, and moved on. Now imagine rewinding the moment and applying just one of these strategies. You hear the name, repeat it, and ask about it, or instantly forge a mental picture connecting the name to the face. You have performed an act of deliberate encoding, turning a fleeting label into a constructed memory. This is the central reversal the science of memory offers us. Forgetting a name is not a retrieval failure. It is an encoding gap that can be bridged only at the moment of introduction, not later. Once you understand that, the familiar post-introduction blankness no longer signals a personal deficiency. It signals that the name arrived without the mental work required to make it stick. And that work, while effortful at first, becomes more automatic with practice, much like any skill. The next time you are introduced to someone, the conditions inside your mind can look fundamentally different. You are no longer a passive recipient of a sound, but an active builder of a memory. Of course, no strategy works flawlessly in every situation. A noisy environment, fatigue, or a name from an unfamiliar language may still present challenges. Unfamiliar speech sounds can be harder to hold in working memory because your brain lacks well-worn pathways for those sound patterns. Cultural differences matter too, and it is always acceptable to ask someone to repeat their name with care and attention. The goal is not to become a name-remembering champion, but to move from feeling helpless to feeling equipped. Let us return one final time to that opening scene with one important change. You are at a gathering, and again a friend introduces you to someone new. This time, as the name is spoken, you mentally pause, repeat it aloud, and notice a detail. The name sounds like a place you once visited. You connect it to the person's warm smile, and you let the web of associations settle. Later in the evening, you spot that same face, and the name rises to your lips without panic. It is not a superpower. It is a demonstration of how memory works when you align your actions with how the mind builds durable traces. Memory is not a camera, passively recording everything that passes before it. It is a constructive process that selects, interprets, and weaves together fragments into something meaningful. A name, once just an arbitrary sound, can become part of that woven fabric if you give it the threads. And each time you do, you honor both the person in front of you and the remarkable, improvable capacities of your own mind. The next introduction is a chance not just to hear a name, but to build its place in your memory from the very first second.